Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Joint Special Education Policy and Teaching and Learning Subcommittees of the Quincy School Committee. And we're going to get right into our agenda and start with Agenda Item 1, MCAS STE Update by Mr. Marani and Ms. Cuniff. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, school committee members, Superintendent Mulvey, Assistant Superintendent Perkins, and my fellow SLT members. Once again, I have the privilege to share out tonight some more updates of our STE expanded pilot. However, it's a particularly greater privilege as I have Ms. Cuniff here to my right. She is the Point Webster grade 8 teacher. She also serves QPS as the Science Instructional Ambassador to DESE. So she works directly with DESE to help us kind of get the information we need to best understand these STE updates. And so that's what we'll go deeper into today to share with you. Our main focus tonight is to offer all of you a closer look at what the STE expanded pilot looks like. I've mentioned this in a few updates in the past. However, we wanted to offer all of you the opportunity to really see what these questions will look like and what our students will encounter when they take on this pilot, both in the grade 5 and grade 8 levels. But I also want to note that what we're seeing is the department is attempting to more closely align their assessments with their educational vision. So back in September of this school year, they released an educational vision just to really talk about what the classroom should look like in an ideal sense. And so what we're seeing is the department trying to make those assessments match that vision. And so just to talk a little bit about what that vision is, when we walk into classrooms, what we hope to see is students solving problems, thinking critically, asking questions, making meaning of complex ideas, both as individual students, but also with their peers, interacting with one another as part of groups, making more meaning of those complex ideas, connecting the content that they're exposed to relevant and real-world context, and along the way, making sure that we as educators are making them feel comfortable and confident enough to take academic risks, learn from their mistakes. I think that's huge. I think we really put a lot of effort in making it clear to students that mistakes are very much a part of the learning process, and they shouldn't be a problem. If anything, they should be celebrated as a learning opportunity. And so we want to make sure our students know that. And then at the end of the day, when they produce, whether it's a completed assessment, a written essay, whatever they're creating, that they can take pride in the work that they're producing. And so that's the educational vision on the part of DESE. And I'm very pleased to say, and I don't think anybody will be surprised here, that as a person who visits classrooms at elementary, middle, and high school, that's happening on a regular basis throughout the Quincy Public Schools. This is nothing new for us in QPS. So it's really, for me, satisfying to see the ed vision brought out by DESE and say, yeah, we're there. However, it's important to note that as a result of this change in assessment, that we do have to look at what we're focused on, our day-to-day instructional practices, and look for minor shifts. Look for things that we can do to improve upon, to help our students prepare for this new form of assessment. And so to help you understand what that assessment really will look like, and also what we can shift our focus on from an instructional standpoint, I'll hand it over to Ms. Cuniff.
Okay, good evening, everyone. If you could please take a look at slide 4. As a result of DESE's release of its educational vision, the middle school science staff is identifying instructional strategies to support our students' learning experiences, which are relevant, real-world, and interactive. By adding phenomena-based learning to our instruction, it encourages students to apply their knowledge to real-world situations. The point of using phenomena-based learning is to drive student inquiry. It is to help students engage in practices to develop the knowledge necessary to explain or predict the phenomenon. Students generate questions that guides the learning and teaching. The practice of asking questions or identifying problems becomes a critical part of trying to figure something out. This supports problem solving, critical thinking, and it helps students demonstrate their learning. Therefore, this is an instructional shift from not only learning about something, but figuring it out. In the classroom, DESE is encouraging science students to engage in performance assessment tasks that apply their knowledge, their skills, and ability to solve an authentic problem or explain a phenomenon. These tasks are hands-on, minds-on investigations, which include group work and creative student products related to the real world. And as a result, students are diving deeper and work in coherence with their teachers. Please go to slide 5. As a result of this new vision and focus on providing high-quality instruction, DESE is creating a high-quality science, technology, and engineering assessment for grades 5 and 8. Involved in this assessment are 4 divisions of stakeholders: the DESE teams, the test developers, advisory groups, and pilot schools, teachers, and students. Quincy Public Schools is participating in the STE pilot assessment, which includes all of our grade 5 and grade 8 students. Teacher feedback and sample student work will be used to refine and develop new tasks. Please take a look at slide 6. Now let's take a look at DESE's timeline regarding this implementation. As I read through the slide, it is important to note that the test design will incorporate lessons learned, less text, more purpose, and improved accessibility. For the 2023-2024 school year, the pilot assessment will be held on the second day of MCAS testing. The scores will not be used in school accountability. Day 1 will be the current next-gen MCAS, and day 2 will be the pilot assessment. In 2024-2025, the pilot assessment will be embedded in the next-gen MCAS for both testing days. The pilot task scores will not be used in state accountability. However, for the 2025-2026 school year, it is anticipated to be the first operational year statewide with results reported to schools. Please go to slide 7. I would like to show you a grade 8 sample of the performance assessment tasks, but first I would like to mention a few key points. These performance assessment tasks have several questions addressing several standards centered around a story. The task follows an instructional storyline model where students are asked to manipulate a simulation and create several models they can use to explain their thinking. The assessment will still have the same percentage distribution across the 4 domains, which means 25% of the total questions will be derived from earth science, 25% from engineering and technology, 25% from life science, and 25% from physical science. They are designed to take 20 minutes with about 7 to 9 questions per performance task. And at this time, we are unsure how many performance tasks there will be. To prepare the pilot districts, DESE has provided resources in the form of classroom performance tasks for grades 3 through 8. Teacher feedback and student answers from these performance tasks, as I mentioned, will be used to design and refine the new assessment style. Okay, so let's take a look at one, please. Please go to slide 8. At the top, we see the current next-gen MCAS, in which students read a scenario about bacteria as decomposers and use the drop-down menu to answer questions. Below is an example of the new assessment in which students answer problems through interactive computer simulations to answer their questions. So now let's take a closer look on slide 9. In this story, Maya and her family member Samuel are riding their electric scooters to the museum. They both started at 100% battery power, but upon arriving at the museum, their battery power is at different percentages. This is the real-life phenomenon that the students will be investigating. This performance task has 7 parts. It covers 4 standards, 1 from grade 8 and 3 from grade 7, on topics such as force, mass, potential, and kinetic energy. There is a tutorial video at the beginning of the assessment that students can refer back to. There is also simulation instructions at each part. Please go to slide 10. 4 of the 7 parts of the simulation are simulations. The remaining questions involve interpreting a graph and high-order multiple choice, but with visual choices. There are also constructed responses. And in addition to assessing the disciplinary core ideas, the science engineering practices are also assessed. An example of a science and engineering practice is the question box at the bottom left of this slide and also on slide 11. All questions within this performance task are based on the storyline involving Maya and Samuel's scooters. Please go to slide 11. Here, the storyline asks the students to create models to compare mass, net force, kinetic energy versus mass, and the scooter's greatest chemical potential energy at various inclines and speeds. It requires students to demonstrate what they know. That's how this assessment is different from Next Gen. The models are the input boxes at the top. So if you can see the letters A, B, C, and D in the top left, these are models. These models are the same in all the simulations that I have seen, regardless of topic. So this will be something that the students will be familiar with. At the end of this performance task, through these 4 simulations and other assessment questions, students come to a conclusion as to why the battery life of the 2 scooters are different. I hope you are all still with me. And that concludes my presentation tonight. And now Mr. Marani will discuss our next steps and areas of focus.
Thank you, Ms. Cuniff. So as we look at our action steps, I want to point out that these are ongoing action steps. In other words, we've already begun taking these action steps. They're not action steps that we need to take in the future, but instead to continue taking. So they're something that as we've been getting this information from the Department of Ed, we then share it out with principals and with those teachers. And then during professional development meetings, we come together and talk about how to best use that. One highlight I'd like to point out, just on February 14th, we had our middle school system-wide professional development day. And I was just taken aback by how well those science teachers collaborated with one another. They already have the shared documents of resources and best practices in place in a very organized, accessible way for each one of these teachers. So they already have a lot of these mechanisms in place so that as we take on this shift, right? And again, I emphasize the word shift rather than change because there's a lot that's already happening. But as we emphasize this shift to prepare our students for this new assessment, these teachers have already set themselves up to access the resources and utilize best practices to deliver those to their students. There's still more work that needs to be done. This is going to take continued effort, not just this year, but beyond. And therefore, as we look at the areas of focus, continued collaboration of those resources, of those best practices, certainly important. Also gearing professional development on deep dive learning. So really, again, not trying to just teach students what to do, but really help them understand the why behind what they're doing. And of course, then as we look at our curricula in the future, making sure that it aligns with this new type of assessment, making sure that these students just have embedded in their curriculum the opportunity to organically practice these types of problems. So with that, I'll hand it over to anybody who has any questions and comments, and I do want to thank you all again for your time tonight, and I want to thank Ms. Cuniff for her presentation. She's really the expert in this subject, so she's a great leader among those science teachers, so of course, her being here is just a testament to that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions from any members? Yes.
Yeah, I
Ms.
just
Lebo,
had-
hold on one sec. Sorry. It's going to take me a little bit there. You tell me. Oh, there we go.
I have a question for Ms. Cuniff. Have you seen, how do you feel about the shift in the vision and the assessments as one of our best science teachers in the district?
Thank you. Well, I will let you know that this is something we started in 2019, 2020. We did start looking at phenomena-based learning. We shared one of our last meetings in February 2020 of 2020. We shared many of examples of performance-based learning. And then in the school year of 20 and 21, as remote teachers, we used many lab simulations to give our students the best that we could without being in a lab. So I'm actually not surprised because this has been part of our educational instruction. However, it will be quite a shift for them to be accustomed to, this new simulation. So even for myself, I know that the font looks small, but there's chances where they can also increase the font. So for me, my focus will be to give them as much practice as possible with the
them what?
simulations. As much practice with the simulations.
Okay. It seems like an enormous change in the assessments, for sure.
I'd have to say, and I don't want to be, I guess, aging myself, but I think I know everything about some sort of simulation or something about the computer, and they just go well beyond my expectations. It's just so natural for them, where, I had to read through this a few times. So we'll see. But we will, we're a very connected team, and we will support our kids as best we can.
Thank you. And what about kids who have difficulty with reading?
Yes, we did. I did bring that up. My training began in January, and we were asked about concerns, and we did bring up our English learners as well as our students with, various learning disabilities. And we were just told that the focus groups were working on them, and we have not received any information yet, but I hope that's coming soon. So as soon as I get that, I'll let you know.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All set, Ms. Lebo? Any questions? All right.
We're going to have the test, the
It'll be
students
this May.
this May,
Yes.
soon. And so the phenomenon-based learning makes sense,
Yes.
kind of like the illustrious
Would you like me to
math,
explain an
right?
Illustrative
example?
mathematics, yeah.
It's the same concept as the math that.
Understanding the why.
Yes.
The why and all that.
Yeah.
And again, I think, and that's great, because that's how we want kids to learn, right? But I think the test is going to be something that they're really going to have to, we're all going to have to get used to giving the test, and them taking it, I think, is our biggest challenge, right? So it would actually be not until 25 when the testing would really matter, or be
May of 26.
of 26, so.
Yes.
Where it's
So we
fully
have 2
operational.
cycles prior to them. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
One of the things we're
Good luck.
looking at too is that this follows a storyline model. So what that means basically is you begin with the phenomenon. You don't tell the students what it is. They're going to try to investigate it themselves. So they drive the questions. So I'm going to give you an example. For my climate change unit, I show them an example of a compressor station releasing gas. I don't tell them where it is. I don't tell them anything. And they determine the questions based upon that. And so I guess the best way to explain it is they're driving the ship, but I've built it and I know where they're going, if that makes sense. So through these investigations, I then find pictures of something that's related to their life, like the Fall River Basin, where we have a compressor station. We also have a chemical plant. We have one of the largest electrical generators on the East Coast that is around the corner. So they begin to see pictures that they recognize, and then they're asking more questions, and which then eventually leads into, fossil fuels and climate change. So it is incredibly different at times, but it's, a lot of fun.
All set?
The only I'd say is for visual learners, this is fine. For learners who are auditory based, it's got to be difficult because there's no way for them to use their best mode of learning. I'm just saying across the board for MCAS, but not specific here, but.
I don't disagree with you, but I think because it's in that pilot stage, I think what we need to do is really reflect on those types of concepts and communicate with the department to take that into account as they develop over, this year and next year. And that's what's nice about having Ms. Cuniff as part of that team. We know she'll be able to go and advocate for our experience as a district to the department. So I totally agree with you. So it's going to be our job to really communicate those concerns and make sure that we land on something that's equitable and accessible for all of our students. Yeah.
And I've heard nothing but great things about Ms. Cuniff, so
Oh, thank you.
she comes highly recommended.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So yeah, I agree that I'm glad we have a couple cycles to get this down because just hearing about it last night at Point Webster PTO, thank you for presenting it there too. But seeing the actual storyline tonight, it does look pretty complex, and I'm curious to see how our students, if they, like you say, will rise to the challenge of the technology to understand what you're supposed to do, because that looked very confusing to me. But again, aging myself, right? I had a couple questions too. So you had mentioned that the performance task was supposed to take 20 minutes, right? So is the entire Maya Samuel thing that we looked at, so all of those questions combined is supposed to be 20 minutes, and we're
Yes.
not sure how many tasks
No.
the test will be composed of?
No, but they did say they're going to keep it, they're looking to keep the test at 90 minutes. But please know that it's still going to be untimed, or the student must finish by the end of the school day. So they're looking at 90 minutes. It's really in the beginning stage. It's a lot of what the pilot districts are going to be reporting to them that they absolutely will be restructuring. So I do have classroom performance assessments for grades 3 through 8, where that DESE has created, where it's supposed to be an end of the unit type of assessment. And so basically it will cover many of these storyline features so that the students will have access to that. And they are providing the consumables, and it's through those samples that the students do and the teachers' feedback that I will periodically be asked to give to DESE from now until June of 2025.
That's great. I'm glad you're going to be able to be an advocate because we have so many wide range of abilities, accommodations, as Mr. Pagoli and Ms. Cahill mentioned, just having those accommodations available and being able to advocate, like, we really need this by the time these scores count, is going to be really important. Now, what about, so I know that you're connected with DESE, but as far as like teacher support, especially our newer teachers, are they going to have what they need to be able to kind of prepare students for this type of storyline?
Sure, I agree with you. You really, as a teacher, need to know the standards, absolutely. And so I do feel that our shared drive that we are using, we have a whole list of resources. We communicate often. It's not just during our meetings. I got, a text with a wonderful resource over the vacation break. So it's a team that I believe works well together, and we have 2 new teachers in the science staff. They do have educational experience, but new to Quincy Public Schools. And they're wonderful asking questions, but it will be through our future system PD that we will work together to support each other.
That's great, just making sure that they're getting what
yes,
they need.
thank you.
And then, is there any connection with parents or families that, that kids could be practicing at home, or any type, is there any link or any resources that DESE has given you for any kind of ways to prepare at home with parents? Especially, I'm thinking like maybe the younger.
Sure. They have not, but we did create a whole set of resources, or I should say URLs, that we can share with families, absolutely.
Okay, great. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
everyone. Thank
you, everybody.
All right, so we're going to be moving on to agenda item number 2, special education rights and responsibilities. Ms. Graham, Ms. Leary, Ms. Buckley, Ms. Carey, and Ms. Karanis, please. Whenever you guys are ready, yeah?
Thank
you.
Good evening, Mrs. Perdios, Mr. Mulvey, and members of the committee. It is my honor to be with you this evening to present our annual presentation of Parents' Rights and Schools' Responsiveness. I just want to introduce my team before we get started. So presenting with me tonight is Jennifer Leary, Coordinator of Special Education, Jill Karanis, Team Administrator, Lisa Chan Iannetta, Acting Team Administrator, Katie Carey, Team Administrator, and Simone Buckley, Team Administrator. So the goal of this presentation is to provide information so that parents really and truly understand their child's rights and the special education process. We know that it can be incredibly overwhelming, and we really like to make sure that we do the best we can so that parents are understanding their child's rights. We really want to ensure that they understand there is a collaboration between families and school personnel, and that by sharing this information, that can just be enhanced. And that parents and school personnel are participating in special education as knowledgeable partners. Again, there is so much information out there, and we truly want to make sure that families have similar knowledge to our school-based staff. I'm going to turn this over to Lisa.
Thanks, Julie. Let's start with special education law. First, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, is a governing factor. And in Massachusetts, we have special ed law as well. It is under the authority of DESE, under the Department of Elementary Secondary Education. These laws all govern generally what we do, and the purpose is to ensure that students who are eligible for special education are supported by their individualized needs, and most importantly, in the least restrictive setting. These laws also help to protect students with disabilities on IEPs. IDEA has 6 main principles. The first, parent and student participation is important. Second, free and appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE. Appropriate evaluation. The individualized education program, otherwise known as the IEP. Least restrictive environment, otherwise known as LRE. And procedural safeguards. And Jill and Jen will be explaining these in more detail further into the presentation. Okay, perfect. Next, there we go, third. Okay, so when is a student eligible for special education? A student is eligible when all 3 of the following are true. First, a student has one or more of the following disabilities that Katie will be describing in more detail. The student is not making effective progress in school due to their disability. And lastly, a student would require specially designed instruction in order to make progress in school. Now Katie will describe the disabilities in more detail.
Lisa. So Massachusetts defines these 13 types of disabilities in federal and state regulations that affect a student's educational progress. First is autism. Autism is a developmental disability significantly affecting verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction. This is generally evident by the age of 3. Students with this type of disability are in every school in Quincy, from general education classrooms to substantially separate classes to out-of-district schools. Next is developmental delay. This involves a child's learning capacity being significantly limited, impaired, or delayed, and exhibits difficulties in one or more of the following areas: receptive and/or expressive language, cognitive abilities, physical functioning, social, emotional, or adaptive function, and/or self-help skills. Next is the intellectual impairment. This includes students that have limitations and delays in performing cognitive tasks, functions, and problem solving is significantly limited. These students benefit from a slower pace of learning and adaptive strategies to meet their individual learning needs. Sensory impairments includes hearing loss, deafness, vision loss, deafness, and deafblindness. Students with this type of disability require very specific individual supports to fully understand information presented auditorily or visually in an educational environment. A neurological impairment includes the limiting or impairment of a student's nervous system. This can include the use of memory, control, or use of cognitive functioning, sensory and motor skills, speech and language, and information processing. Next is emotional impairment. This includes students that their educational performance is adversely affected by emotional dysregulation and is not explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. This also supports learners with the inability to build or maintain interpersonal skills or relationships with peers and teachers. Next is the neurological impairment, communication, and health impairments. They can affect a student's communication and social skills, information processing, motor skills, organization skills, and basic life functions. The Quincy Public Schools Special Education Department provides the least restrictive and appropriate settings as well as accommodations to meet these students' individual needs. Finally, specific learning disability is a disability that may manifest itself as an imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or calculate math. The Quincy Public Schools resource room teachers work collaboratively with the curriculum and grade level teachers to meet each student's individual needs. An example of a specific learning disability is dyslexia. Next, Simone will talk about information about special education in general.
Specially designed instruction varies based on individual student needs. Specially designed instruction can mean changes in the information a student is taught or changes in how the student demonstrates learning. Special education may consist only of related services, such as speech and language, occupational or physical therapy, that are necessary for the student with a disability to make progress or to access the general education curriculum. Special education is always designed to meet each individual student's needs. A unique feature of special education is that it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is individually designed to meet an individual student's needs by addressing the needs of the student and assisting that student to make effective progress and become more independent in demonstrating their learning. As you can see from the illustration here, we again emphasize that special education is only one of the types of supportive services that may be available in the general education program. Special education is not a location. Special education services may be delivered in a variety of ways and in a variety of settings, ranging from supportive services in the general education classroom to services provided in separate environments or schools. Now I'm going to talk about some timelines. So if your child is suspected of requiring special education services, then from the time that you consent to the evaluation, the school district has 45 school working days to do the following. First, complete the evaluation. This is required to be done within the first 30 school working days of that 45-day period. Then convene the team to consider eligibility. You, as the student's guardian, have the right to ask for and receive written assessment results 2 days in advance of that team meeting. We recommend you do so that you are prepared and are able to determine if you have any questions regarding the assessment information. If the student is found eligible, at that meeting, the team will also develop an IEP, and in most cases, the team will determine the appropriate placement to provide services on the IEP at that same meeting. Immediately following that team meeting, the district must provide you, the guardian, with the proposed IEP and proposed placement. You then have the right to accept in part or in full the IEP and placement, or refuse the IEP and placement. The regulations require that you exercise these consent or refusal rights within 30 days of receiving the proposed IEP and proposed placement from the school district. If you consent as soon as the district receives your written consent, services should begin promptly. That means if your child does need special education services and you provide your consent immediately, then services will begin as soon as you have provided your signature accepting the IEP and placement. If you have to discuss or consider other services or placements, or if you wish to think about the proposed IEP and placement before consenting to it, then it may take a little bit longer, and these services can begin as long as we receive that written consent. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jill to start talking about some of the principles.
I'm going to discuss the first three principles of IDEA. The first principle is parent and student participation. So starting with the first bullet, parents have the right to participate in all special education planning and decision-making. This is an extremely important underlying principle of what we do. We want and truly value parent and guardian involvement in all aspects of the IEP process, in both the planning and in the decision-making. Parents know their child best, therefore their input is extremely valuable. Students are the focus of special education and the focus of all we do, so our recommendations are always student-centered. It's important that students have input and participation in helping to plan for their education and beyond. As you will hear at a later date, with the implementation of the new IEP, students are asked to have input at their initial IEP development as early as 3 years old. Students are also invited to their IEP meetings at age 14, or if they will be turning 14 during that IEP period. It is also the obligation of the school district to make strong efforts to ensure parent and student participation. The district will always make every effort to include parents in the special education process. While face-to-face meetings are likely preferred, we also do Google Meets or phone conferences, whichever arrangement works best for the family. If English is not the primary language of the parent, we will arrange for interpreters to be present at the meeting. Our goal is to eliminate any barrier for the family so they can be active participants in the special education process. Moving on to Principle 2, which is FAPE. FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. Free, meaning that the education and special education services provided are at no cost to the family. Appropriate, meaning students on IEPs have equal access to learning. The services are specially designed to help a student progress toward meeting their specific IEP goals. Public, the services are provided by the district or under the direction of the district. And education, this encompasses preschool through high school or until age 22 in some cases. It includes extracurricular activities. Moving on to Principle 3, appropriate evaluation. This principle ensures that we offer appropriate evaluations to our students. The first time a student is tested to determine eligibility is called an initial evaluation. Thereafter, once eligible, students are assessed in all areas of suspected need at least every 3 years, which is called a reevaluation. Assessments that may be proposed during an evaluation include psychological assessment, which can include both cognitive testing and assessment for social emotional functioning. Educational assessments looking at student achievement in the areas of reading, writing, and math. Occupational therapy testing, assessing fine motor skills. Speech and language testing, assessing overall language skills. Physical therapy, assessing gross motor skills. And we also have a vision specialist, and we are able to assess for hearing deficits. Finally, the assessment tools need to be unbiased and specifically chosen to assess suspected areas of disability. We can't rely on just one measure or tool. We need a variety of tools, and we also rely on information and input from teachers and parents. Bias must also be considered when we are determining if a student has a specific learning disability. We want to make sure we are not identifying a student as disabled due to socioeconomic status, race, or any other factors. And now I'll turn it over to Jen to discuss the remaining 3 principles.
Principle number 4 is the Individualized Education Program, or the IEP. As we discussed earlier this year during our program improvement plan for the special education department, Massachusetts is requiring a new IEP form for the 2024-2025 school year, and we will give a separate presentation in the future with more details on what that new form will look like. However, the information included in the IEP is the same. It's just organized a little differently to make it more user-friendly and more student-focused. So these bullets here that talk about the requirements for the information that needs to be included are all still included in the new IEP format. We must address parent and student concerns and the student's vision for the future and planning for what they would like to do once they leave school.
The IEP must explain student strengths and how the student's disability impacts their ability to access the general education curriculum. The IEP must include SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely goals with specific objectives in order to achieve those goals and who is responsible for assisting the student to meet those goals. And you'll see once we show you the new IEP format that each of those components of the SMART goal are spelled out on the new goal pages. The IEP must also include a list of services provided, the location of those services, the amount of time that those services will be provided for, and who is responsible for them. And again, on the new form, in order to clarify that information, any student who is eligible for extended school year services, there's a separate grid for that now. So it's really clear to see what services are happening during the school year and what services are happening during the summer program. Principle number 5 is the least restrictive environment. So our goal and our mandate through the state is always to provide access to the general education environment to the extent possible for the student to learn there. We really think long and hard about why we would remove a student from the general education environment, and we do not remove students from general education solely because of a need for modifications and accommodations. So we really try to put in place whatever we can in their classroom with their peers before we make that decision to move them to a more restrictive environment, where they're either going perhaps to a resource room teacher or to a substantially separate classroom, or if need be, to a separate school. Sometimes this means that some of our interventionists may go into the general education classrooms to provide support. So our literacy teachers, EL teachers, some of our related service providers could go assist the general education teachers with what strategies they could use in the classroom. Removal from general education only occurs when the nature and severity of the disability requires specialized instruction that cannot be provided in a general education classroom. So again, we really will only move more restrictive when we have exhausted all other options within general education. And the final principle is the procedural safeguards. So these are written out in a document that families receive every year. We tend to send them out with the IEP after we have their annual IEP meetings. Within those procedural safeguards, parents have the right to receive written notice regarding all IEP activities. So IEP meeting invitations, evaluation consent forms, the document itself are all sent home in writing to families. Families have the right to consent or to reject all or part of what has been proposed by the school team. That includes evaluations, services, placement recommendations, and as well as any initial services that are being offered for the first time or changes to services that have been in place. The school cannot evaluate or service a child without written parent consent. So in order to begin testing or to provide any service, we need that signature back from families before we can do that. And parents have the right to revoke their consent at any time. So if they agree to something that then down the line they feel isn't working, then we can have a conversation about that and make changes. Sometimes it does happen that team members disagree on any proposed changes to IEPs, and when that does happen, the terminology is stay put to the previous IEP. So the last time the parent accepted, we're going to continue those services until we reach an agreement about how to move forward. So we're not going to take anything away during that kind of limbo period where we're working together to figure out what the new plan is. We, as a team and a district, work really hard with our families to not get to the point where we're having a big disagreement like that, but there are occasionally times when parents and school are not able to reach an agreement on their own. So in those cases, for the protection of the parents and the students, the problem resolution system, mediation, and due process procedures are used. This includes contacting the Office of Quality Assurance and the Board of Special Education Appeals. But as I said, going through this process is always a last resort. We like to try everything possible not to reach this point and to work with our families, but sometimes it's unavoidable. And so we do have those formal procedures in place in order to assist in those situations. We've already spoken about the timelines. Again, they're in place to ensure that the school completes all tasks and parents receive all their information in a timely manner. All student records are confidential, and staff receives training on this every year. So information is only shared with the staff members who need to know that information about a student.
And information can also be shared with outside providers. So we have students where we may need to speak with physicians or other therapy providers, but we only do that if we have written consent from parents, again, in order to contact those other providers. And then we've already mentioned, the last one is that parents have the right to receive their copies of the evaluation reports 2 days prior to the meeting upon request. So we can have all that information ready before you come into the IEP meeting. So any questions on any of those legal regulations?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Mrs. Lebo?
Thank you. I have a question. You explained to me the timeline if the school sees something and brings it to the parent, what the timeline looks like, but what about when the parent brings it to us? How do we respond if the parent comes in and says, I think my student has a learning disability?
So the timeline is the same. We still have to respond. And we would then, consult with the team and then send out the consent within 5 days.
And so would you do an assessment of that student, or you would determine whether you thought an assessment needed to be done, or?
If the parent requests it, yes.
So if a parent requests it, you'll do an assessment of the
Yes.
student? Thank you.
Or use data that we already have, but we certainly want to make sure that we are, answering the parents' concerns.
Because there may be some times when you don't think an assessment is needed, or?
Or we may already have data that could answer the parents' questions or concerns that potentially could not have been previously shared with them. Like, maybe there was a recent classroom assessment that was performed that the parent doesn't have that updated information. But when parents bring concerns, to our attention, we always make sure that we answer them, whether it's using the data we already have or administering updated assessments.
Thank you. I have heard from parents about the work of Child Find going on, that parents have been notified that they would like to do an assessment of their students by the staff. So I think that's great that we have that going on. But I just wonder about the other things, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
And I know we've been inviting the 14-year-olds to their IEP meetings to do the transition planning for years.
Yep.
Have we started inviting those younger kids yet?
So that is not a mandate until the upcoming school year, 24-25. So previously, it was just students that would be turning 14 within that school year. So sometimes it was 13-year-olds. But as we mentioned, the new IEP form, we are to include input from students as young as 3 years old. And we are working really hard to kind of create some templates as to how we could potentially do that. But it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be invited to the meeting, just that their input is included. So one of the very first questions asks, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in the next year I want to, or at school I like. So it's really language that is student friendly. But
And
we're
age
also
appropriate.
working on some ways that we can help some of our students who may be limited or nonverbal, that they could answer those questions as well.
Because I think some kids might be intimidated by going to the meeting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the parents are intimidated when you go in that room with all those people there.
Yeah, well, similar to how it's always been done with our older students, we typically have the case manager have conversations with the students ahead of time so that it's not overwhelming. And sometimes they even come already prepared, with a statement already written, or in the case of some of our students at the collaborative, they may have a short video that they present to us. Some students come with even just some picture icons to share their information with us. So we really do try to make sure it's as comfortable as possible. But as we said, it's student-centered. We really want to ensure that we're including their voice.
Yeah, that's great. In my last question, probably not a question, probably more of a comment. Again, I can't stand that dyslexia isn't listed as one of the specific learning. Don't say specific learning disabilities, and they may list 9 things. Dyslexia is very, very prevalent, and it should be one of the main, I believe it should be listed there. And they're having us do all this assessment around it, which is good. And we've been doing that before we even were told to do it, so
Yes,
which is
that's
also good. But it just drives me crazy that it's not there. Just a comment, sorry. I'm good.
Mr. Bergoli?
Thank you. But we can't diagnose dyslexia, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that a hospital diagnosis?
If we suspect based on our
You suspect,
assessments,
but you
yes.
can't diagnose. Am I
We
correct?
can say that we suspect the child has dyslexia, and we can support them as a result of that.
Well, way back when, you had to have a hospital-diagnosed dyslexia.
Yeah, yeah. We have so many updated assessments now that really do show us.
Okay.
And how we're going to support that student doesn't really change, whether it's from a hospital or our own
No, I agree.
assessments.
I agree.
And we can actually say the word. We can say, based on our assessments, we suspect your child has dyslexia, and this is how we're going to support them.
Back when I was chairperson, one of the things I did with every single evaluation that came across my desk was to have the parent in do a social assessment. Is that still part of the evaluation process?
Yes.
I know it's not necessary.
But it gives us a lot of information.
It does, and it also shows the parent that we're not in an adversarial relationship.
Yes.
We're in a cooperative relationship, and I think that's really important going through the process because it's intimidating for parents. We all know what's going on, but they don't.
Yeah.
And it is intimidating, so I think it's really important to do that. Classroom assessment is still part of the evaluation, I assume. And we talked about pull-out versus in-class remediation.
Yes.
What's the percentage?
Oh
You
my
have a-
gosh,
you have a
Mr. Begoli,
ballpark?
that's a great question because it really looks different for every student, and the reason for it could
I'm
be
talking about
different.
system-wide.
Yeah, I really don't know for sure, to be honest with you, and it changes all the time because some students may do better when they're included in their classroom, and some students struggle with transition, so having that student in their classroom is a better way to facilitate that therapy session. Some students do better when they're in a quieter, less distracting environment, and I honestly couldn't say, the percentage of which is push in and which is pull out.
The ability to generalize these skills in the
Yes,
environment.
yeah.
Sometimes having it in that general education environment is much better. They'll generalize the skill there, but they're just learning it in the separate setting, and that isn't helping them to generalize it because they can't do it. So it's good for them to do that push in as well.
Right. I would think a child with dyslexia would be better in a pull-out, though. Am I
I think that would
inaccurate
depend
or
on the
no?
student too.
Yeah, really? Okay. I'm not an expert in that area either. Regarding the assessments, the parent can reject the assessments, am I correct? And then, that wasn't mentioned here, but what's the procedure for that for parents?
If the parent does reject the assessments, they actually would reach out to the team at school, and the team would reach out to Lisa. And then they would work together with Lisa to determine what next assessments we could propose, whether it's a neuropsych or an additional education assessment.
So it doesn't automatically go to a neuropsych?
It doesn't. It's really individual for every student and what
Okay.
what the parent request is.
But the school system is then required to pay for that, am I correct?
We do pay for those.
If a parent rejects the findings of the evaluation, they are eligible to receive an independent evaluation through request. I do process that for the district now, and if that is what the parent would like to do, that is what we would provide.
That's all information that, again, with that initial meeting with the parents is, if you lay it all out, there's no surprises and they understand what their rights are and then what our responsibilities are. So again, it's not adversarial, it's cooperative, and I think it makes for a better flow
Absolutely.
in terms of accepting the IEP that, we both collaborate on, that's acceptable to both the parent and the school system so that it works for the child. So
I would agree.
that's it for me.
Thank you.
So I said enough.
Thank you. Do we know how many students are on an IEP or receiving special ed services in Quincy?
At last check, it was about 2,100 students.
Okay, so this is a lot, and
It is a lot.
it's constantly impressive to me how the extent to which we're able to support these kids, and every child, as you mentioned, is unique in what they need in this category, and I think that you guys really kind of see that. I feel like you see that, and thank you for all you do on this. I know it takes a lot of work. I think that the things that I usually hear from parents about the IEP process. It's just, again, they're intimidated. They don't have the information. They don't understand all this stuff. And I know that between the schools, I know CPAC, there's a big, push to get information out to parents. Is this document on the QPS website now?
It is, yes.
Okay, so,
It's updated every year. Last year's is up there.
right, so families can easily find this. And is this given to them like a printed out copy when they come to that meeting?
So it's not a printed out copy of this. What they get are the procedural safeguards, which is a much more in-depth details. It's about 15-plus pages.
20 pages, maybe.
That goes through every single one of these in a lot more detail.
Okay, but it does have, the dates, the days from
Yes.
service, so it includes all of that. So they have it in
And
paper
that's shared with
form.
families
Okay.
annually. And we also have the ability to translate it into any language families would like.
Okay, that's
And they're
great.
actually posted on the DESE website in a variety of languages, so we can just print them right off from there. In all kinds of different I don't know, maybe like 15 different languages right on the DESE website, so.
And most of the kiddos that are receiving services, I'm assuming everything goes pretty well. But the ones that, as you mentioned about the formal mediations and the appeals, how many on average of those do we have a year that get to the point where we can't work with families and we need to take that next step?
I would say maybe 2, 3 that we would have like a problem resolution, which is where they would have a concern that they would bring to us. And then most often we can kind of work through that together. In my time as director, it's gone a step above that only once.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out a way to get, because it perpetuates, right? Families kind of always need more information. And I think what's happening is, as the kiddos having these issues and having these evaluations, parents are, that's a lot of mental stuff going on, processing that yourself, and then to have all these, well, here are the dates and here's the deadlines. And it feels like we're doing it at the right time, but I think just checking in and making sure we're over giving information so that everyone's really clear on dates and that you can reject, that things are covered. If there is a point that cost ever comes into it for families, it sounds like there isn't, but making sure that that's clear and they understand that and they're comfortable with it. I think, just emphasizing that as much as we can, which I'm sure you do already. But I think that's how we address that, I think. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Oh, yes, Mrs. Lebo.
One more question. Have we presented this to CPAC, to all the parents? Should we?
We do it at a CPAC, we do a presentation, but I was just thinking, we actually just said it. It would be a great idea if all of you did a presentation once a year as like a parent academy, because a lot of times it helps parents to know who the people are that they have to deal with. They don't know you guys, like, unless they've had experience with you, but to see your faces and have you explaining the same way you're explaining to all of them, step by step, would actually be a great idea.
I'd be happy
maybe
to.
do it at the beginning of each year as a parent academy, especially for like kindergarten families coming in, preschool families. It might be a really good extra bonus of information.
Especially since 20% of our children are involved, so I think it would be great if we could get it.
Well, and with so many kids, the learning center opening, it's gonna be something where you're gonna have more and more parents who are like, is my kid, do they need to be here? What is and even preschool kids, that's such a tough time. They're just getting into school. And when parents are questioning things at that age, they don't know anything. Because when you come in with a child and you just have a child, you're going to school, you know nothing. So to have this information presented to you and giving you an idea of, oh, this is what I need to do and this is what I'll get and how I get it would be a great thing.
That's a great idea.
I would agree.
Very good. All right, I think we're all set. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Appreciate the work. So we're going to be moving on to agenda item number 3, related service provider caseloads. Ask up Assistant Superintendent Perkins, Mrs. Graham, and Mrs. Leary. Whenever you guys are ready.
Thank you.
I am actually not doing very much presenting tonight, so but I am just going to thank Julie and Jen for their work on this. So they've been looking at the caseloads to put this together, and they've done a phenomenal job. And I think you'll be very impressed when you hear some of the work that they've done behind the scenes, and just their knowledge in this area is unbelievably impressive. So with that, I will turn it away to Julie and Jen.
Thanks, Mrs. Perkins. So as Mrs. Perkins mentioned, it was brought to our attention by Mrs. Cahill that there were some concerns about related service provider caseloads, and it was moved to subcommittee. And so Jen and I are here this evening to kind of present to you all the information that we have gathered about our current caseload for our related service provider, and then to offer you some recommendations of what we could potentially see as some solutions moving forward. So the purpose, for the purpose of tonight's presentation, when we speak about our related service providers, we are primarily speaking about our speech and language pathologists, our occupational therapists, and our physical therapist. I do want to make sure that I mention that we do have 3 additional related service providers. We have Diane Newell, who is our teacher of the visually impaired, Brianna Nichols, who is our educational audiologist. I'm sorry, Diane is actually a QPS employee. Brianna Nichols is contracted with us through the Learning Center for the Deaf in Framingham. And then we have Naomi Zabit, who is an orientation and mobility specialist, and we contract through South Shore Educational Collaborative for her services. We did not include these service providers in tonight's presentation because the students that they service have such unique needs that their caseload is always consistently really low. If and when we ever felt like it wasn't, we would certainly, include them in some of these recommendations. And I'm going to turn this over to Jen.
All right. So this is a very wordy slide, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to clarify some of the vocabulary and definitions around the terms caseload and workload. There is a lot of information on here because I quoted this directly from the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, otherwise known as ASHA, which is the National Professional Association for the Speech and Language Pathologists. So caseload really means just straight number of students or number of hours that you spend face-to-face with a student in front of you. So what we use the word caseload a lot to talk about how many students our service providers work with, but it really is looking only at that direct service and consult time, and that's all. Workload looks at the number of hours of student contact, but also includes all the other responsibilities required to implement best practices and to support access to the general education curriculum for our students. So really looking at all the other things that the related service providers do besides sitting face-to-face with a student in front of them. And as we move through the presentation, I'll give some more specific examples about what some of those things are. So again, as part of the coming up with some recommendations to present to you and share with you tonight, we've done a lot of research into the national and state guidelines for each discipline. So as I've already mentioned, ASHA, the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, is the first one that I've highlighted here. ASHA does not recommend a specific caseload number for a number of reasons. There's actually no research studies out there to support what an appropriate caseload size would be. And also, needs of students can vary greatly and need to be considered as far as, what the actual service providers are providing. So a student who maybe, I like to use speech examples because that's my background, but a student who maybe has some articulation errors, isn't pronouncing their words correctly, probably doesn't need as much time and effort as a student who has a more significant complex communication disability where they might be nonverbal and require some sort of augmentative communication device and more intensive therapy services, so that one student could mean 2 very different things as far as the amount of time and effort that needs to go into making sure they're successfully able to communicate. So those are the big reasons why there's no just specific caseload number recommended by ASHA. And Massachusetts also does not recommend a specific caseload number. In 2022, ASHA published statewide guidance, including all 50 states as well as Washington, D.C. 21 of the 50 states have set a caseload number, and the other 30 do not have a guidance number, just like Massachusetts. The maximum ranges were between 30 and 80, so they're kind of all over the place. And some states consider a workload analysis, which I'll speak a little more about, which includes the number of hours to complete all work tasks that need to happen during the school week. And then here I've included the OT and PT guidance. So the Massachusetts Association for Occupational Therapy guidelines are very similar to ASHA's. They also do not recommend a specific number for the same reasons that there's not a specific number for ASHA. And then the American Physical Therapy Association actually had really limited resources that I was able to access. And I would like to thank our PT staff because I reached out to them and they helped me look into this as well. And we really all came up with the same, just very limited couple of articles about it for the PT discipline. But all three national associations, so ASHA, the AOTA for occupational therapy, and the APTA for physical therapy, released a joint statement in 2014, recommending that shifting to a workload model to maximize student outcomes rather than suggesting specific caseload numbers. So next I really want to take a look at what some of those workload components are. And if you compare these two lists, one is for speech, one is for OT, they are very similar. So these are some of those components that I was speaking about earlier. Besides that face-to-face time with the students when you're providing actual direct therapy services, what are some other things that these people need to do as part of their school day in order for students to be successful? So as I mentioned, really looking at the complexity of need of the student. So depending on their type of disability and the complexity of their disability, they may need more intensive services and time from the therapists. The therapist, as we just spoke about, the evaluation process in our last presentation, they are doing evaluations, both 3-year reevaluations for students that are currently on their caseload, as well as any of those referrals we may get from teachers or families. They'll have to conduct those evaluations as well, which includes time with the student, writing reports, meeting with families to go over results, and developing plans for how to best support the students. There's also consultation time and training with school staff, and consultation with outside agencies. So I also mentioned in the previous presentation that we may have students who see other providers, and so it takes time to contact those people and make sure we're all really on the same page about the best way to support the students. Of course, parent communication. And implementing and maintaining equipment is really important. I think PT examples are actually really easy for this. So if you think about a student who may have like a wheelchair or a walker or a stander or a gait trainer, like that's physical equipment that needs to be maintained and made sure it's the right size for growing children. We have to make adjustments to those things all the time. As far as speech, it may be a communication device that the students are using that needs to make sure they have the correct vocabulary sets and that they can access it, and how are they gonna touch it? What size should those buttons to be so that they can reach them appropriately? All of that takes a lot of time, and then training staff and families on how to use those materials as well. And then OTs would be, things that may help with handwriting or typing, and how can the student output for their classes? We may need some equipment for that as well. And then, of course, with the related service providers, it's not like reading where we could just go out and buy a curriculum. These are all individualized services, so the providers need to develop their own materials and individualize them for the students, and of course that takes time and planning. And so I know I just talked a lot about not recommending specific numbers, but I did want to give you kind of a sense of where things stand with our related service providers in Quincy right now. So they're broken out here by the different disciplines. We do have some part-time staff, so that's why we see those kind of funny like SLPs of 22.4 and OTs have 13.2 staff members. So we're these numbers obviously kind of fluctuate day to day depending on picking up new kids, decertifying kids who have met their goals, and some other reasons as well. But back when I last asked the staff for their numbers, I think was December. So speech students total in the district are creeping up to about approaching that 1,300 mark. OT students, we've got over 700, and we have 117 students who receive PT services. And again, within, plus or minus a little bit because, those numbers are a couple months old, but they stay pretty stable around there within a school year. Our average in general SLP caseload is 56 students, and we have 7 speech language pathology assistants who help with the larger caseloads. And then, as you can see broken out here for both the SLPs and the OTs, the average for those providers who are working with the students in our substantially separate, like really more complex special education programs is a little bit lower than for those working in our general ed schools. So that's kind of where the current numbers stand. And then as we were kind of putting together some recommendations, there's several things we wanted to take into consideration. So there are some things we can do with our current workloads to make some changes to that to make them a little more manageable. So really looking at that eligibility criteria, which again, we touched on in our previous presentation, but really looking at, does the student have a disability, and does that disability impact their ability to access the general education curriculum? So there may be times when we agree, yes, the student does have a disability, but they have things in place that are allowing them to access the curriculum, so they don't necessarily need specially designed instruction or one-to-one or small group services in order to meet those needs. So really looking at like who's eligible for school-based services, and then that leads into how are we providing those services for the students. So we traditionally have done a lot of pull-out therapy with our students here, once a week for 30 minutes, twice a week for 30 minutes. But so we're really taking a look at our service delivery models and what's the best way. We spoke earlier again about providing some push-in services and having therapists go into classrooms to support teachers with strategies that the students can use throughout the school day in their classrooms. And one thing we've really been working on with our CARES program and are hoping for the future with the new DeCristofaro Center as well is doing some co-treats where different therapists are working together on a single activity with their lens from their expertise to really make functional activities for the students. So instead of coming with me to a speech room, doing some speech things, and then going with an OT to an OT room and doing some OT things, and then going to PT, like really working together, collaborating with the other therapists to do a single activity, looking at it from our different lenses and making it functional for the students to be able to participate. We can have scheduling considerations as well, different types of therapy. One thing some of our SLPs have been doing is a burst therapy model. So some students with articulation disorders, it's really muscle memory and practicing. And we all know if you go to the gym 1 day a week, you'll get better, you'll feel better, but it's going to be really slow. But if you go 3 times a week, you're going to see a lot more progress more quickly. So we have several of our speech therapists who have been doing quick artic with the students. So they see them 5 minutes a day, every single day. So the kids get that reminder every day, this is your sound, this is how you make it. Remember to do this throughout the school day today, rather than just seeing them once a week for 30 minutes. So we've seen some really nice progress with those students, leading them to not require our services as long because they're doing well. Some districts do a cyclical model of services where within a month they may do 3 weeks on of direct services and 1 week is set aside for time to do all those other things, consultation with other providers, consultation with parents, report writing, IEP writing, all those other pieces that go along with the job. And it just requires a little bit of tweaking how you write an IEP. So you do like minutes per month instead of minutes per week, but also like a mindset shift for the team to think about it as well. So I've personally never had any experience doing that, but it's something out there that some districts do to help manage workloads. And then also considering for some students, they might really benefit from some initial intensive services up front, really seeing them frequently and a lot, and then fading those services as they learn those skills and start to transfer them over to their classes. So being a little more flexible maybe with how we're providing our services can be helpful. And again, we've spoken about already, so our students with a high level of need require more intensive and time-consuming services, both directly and support services. And then we have some factors that are challenging to plan for. So, we always start out with a good guesstimate in September about what our caseloads are going to look like. But over the course of the school year, we get new referrals, we test kids, we pick them up, add them to our caseloads. And then that move-in factor as well. If students come to Quincy and have an existing IEP, then we need to honor what their IEP already says, and there's just no predicting really how many students are going to move in or go to a particular school or need a particular program. So those are some of those like trickier planning factors that we can't necessarily know right up front in September. So.
Thanks, Jen. So we came to you this evening with some guideline recommendations after really thoughtful consideration about the students that we are supporting here in Quincy. Really looking closely, I mean, Jen has spent an enormous amount of time researching this. And so we are presenting some recommended guidelines for you. I just wanted to note that we are recommending an average for a couple of variables, specifically ones that Jen just mentioned that, we don't have control over when students move into Quincy and have an already existing IEP that calls for related services. A student may be found no longer eligible at some point during the school year. Also, we may have students that become newly eligible during the school year. So there's always variables that, fluctuate that caseload. So in the language that we chose, we really mentioned that word average because it can be a range. So specifically, we are a recommended guideline of an average caseload of 55 to 65 students for SLPs, OTs, and PTs who support students in inclusive settings. And that would be the average caseload without the support of assistants, a speech assistant, an OT assistant, or a PT assistant. Secondly, we recommended a guideline of an average caseload of 45 to 55 for students for speech, OT, and PT who support students in a caseload of a substantially separate setting. And again, that would be the average caseload without the supportive assistance. And we again wanted to really be mindful when determining a caseload, the following variables should be considered. The complexity of the needs of the students. And I know we've mentioned this multiple times, but I cannot stress enough that when we are speaking about a student who is being supported in a general education inclusive setting, their needs look very different than the students that we are potentially proposing for the DeCristofaro Learning Center. We just always need to be mindful of numbers don't equal numbers. We're really speaking about individual students, and we need to always keep their needs in mind. Again, looking at direct versus indirect services, some of the things that Jen just spoke about. Communication with families and other providers. Some families do require a lot more communication because of the needs of their students. Those students may have a lot more outside service providers that we do need to provide a lot of consultation and communication with, evaluation and documentations. And then lastly, again, just that preparation of student-related materials, adaptive equipment, assistive technology. Those things do take additional time that some students need an intensive amount of, and some students don't need any amount of. So again, these are just guideline recommendations that we wanted to bring forward to you tonight. And at that, I will say thank you for your time. I know that's a lot of information. It has taken us quite a while to process through it, and certainly open to any questions.
Thank you. Okay. Mrs. Lebo?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So when you're talking about the guideline recommendations, what you're sort of saying is that if they have the support of an assistant, their caseload could be higher than that.
It could be because their time of face-to-face instruction would be less.
But if somebody had 55 or 65 students without support, how many times a week could they possibly see a student?
It really would depend. Some students only need that support, as Jen mentioned, those quick bursts. They only need 5 minutes a day, where other students may have 1, 2, 3 times a week on their service delivery grid.
And it depends. Some of those students with the less intensive needs would be seen in groups rather than one-to-one. So, 55 students, if you have 3 students in a group, it doesn't take up as much direct service time because you're seeing them together rather than.
So that really speaks to workload again.
Yes, it does.
More than
Yeah.
more than caseload. So
And again, when we are thinking about potentially some of our older students that are in middle school and high school, a lot of their groups are larger because by that point, they're really working on those social pragmatics, and it can't be done with one-to-one or two-to-one services. It really does need a larger group so that conversations happen a little bit more naturally.
Yeah. I guess that was my question. I think I have another one, but I can't remember.
We can come back to you. Mrs. Cahill?
Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
On my behalf. More work, that's all you needed.
Yeah.
Another presentation. But, you know, I had heard from some people just concerns about and observations about maybe the caseloads being bigger than they think they should be. And I respect totally what you present to us because you're on the ground. I'm not on the ground and I don't know really what it entails. But I think that what I really would like, you know, I had them put it in policy because I wasn't sure if we wanted to have it be a policy made of certain numbers, but understanding what you're saying is it's fluid. Kids come, kids go, they don't need services, they do need, I mean, it's hard to kind of understand what, it would basically be more that, I think what I'd like us to do is look at this every year, not necessarily have a policy of a certain number like we do with classroom sizes, but maybe just as an opportunity to evaluate to see, maybe we need more staff, you know? It has you look at it in a way to see if we are providing the services that we need and that our teachers and our professionals aren't overburdened with, you know, caseloads, because it is a caseload and it's a workload, but as you said, once you have more caseloads, you have, the workload might not be as difficult, but you have more on the other side as far as reporting and all the other, you know, responsibilities that you have. So from my perspective, the way I want, what I originally thought, putting it in policy was having a number, which, because I thought that there was a recommendation by state and federal guidelines. That not being the case, I think from my perspective, I'd like us just to have maybe this be a presentation annually. It doesn't have to be huge, but just that it lets us know you looked at the numbers, and if there has to be adjustments that you think need to be made, that we can support you to do that. Does that make sense to my colleagues? That was my reason for bringing it to a policy meeting.
It could possibly be part of the special education improvement plan, too.
Sure,
Just because we just get that piece in that plan would be helpful.
That makes sense. I'm good with
I
mine.
have
Thank
one
you
more
for
question.
doing that.
Mr. Guttrow had some too. Do you want me to come back to you, Ms. Lebo?
That's fine.
Okay. All right, Mr. Guttrow.
First of all, Jen, amazing research.
Thank you.
I mean, that is just incredible how much time and effort and research. I was captivated. You know, I mean, when you think about any service provider, even a medical professional, whatever the case may be, you wonder what their workload is, or social worker, you know, what are their caseloads? How do they figure it out? And just the context and the variability and the frequency of meetings and the touches and the duration and, you know, so many variables. I mean, so to Ms. Cahill's point, you know, thanks national and state for giving us nothing basically in terms of guidance. So it's basically all of you. And so I was going to say, is there any discussion with the parents about their perception, their views, or the service providers themselves? Do you have like annual feedback from either of those ends in terms of, you know, you getting high marks, or everybody's ready to snap, or whatever the case may be, or is this fair and realistic? You know, the range that you had. It's just useful to get that feedback, and how do you get that feedback over the course of the year, especially as your numbers fluctuate day to day, basically?
I hear a lot from the service providers about how they're feeling about it, and if they're feeling like they're really creeping up there and they're struggling, then they usually do reach out to me or Julie and let us know that they're having a hard time. I mean, I myself know that things happen. We had one year where in the middle of the year we opened a new pre-K classroom at Snug Harbor while I was working there, and those teachers teach half-day sessions.
Yeah.
So just by hiring one new teacher, I acquired like 6 to 7 new kids in the AM session and another 6 to 7 new kids in the PM session. So, you know, for me, that was mid-year, and I made it work through the end of the year, but I said, like, this is going to be unmanageable moving forward. And so we added a part-time person to help me for the following September. So, you know, I do think people are pretty open with letting me know when they feel like things are getting really challenging. And I do periodically ask them for their numbers. And like I said, numbers don't tell the only story, but I actually have like a really good sense of who's working with the more complex kids and who's not. So that number can be a little more telling for me just because I, you know the programs. So yeah, I do reach out to them periodically to have them send me updates, which is why I had like December numbers from them. And then what we do at the end of the year, so in June, we project where our students are going to be next year. So obviously we have all those transition grades, so pre-K to kindergarten, grade 4 or 5 to up to middle school, and then grade 8 up to grade 9. So we put together a list of how many students are going to be at each school. So I have that information in June and then look at it and try to figure out like, oh, this school is going to have a bigger burst in September than maybe they had last year. Do we need to rearrange our staff in order to be able to cover for that? So it's kind of like an ongoing, most of the feedback I get is from the staff members themselves, but really kind of ongoing updates from them about how they're feeling.
You know, it'd be so great if there were just some kind of a standard expectation across school districts that this is a reasonable caseload. I mean, I think of people that work for me that do comparable jobs. You know what I mean? Some can't handle what others can handle. So how do you tell? You know, some will complain and they have far less work to do. So I have no idea how that translates into caseload or workload or any of that in that world. But that's a difficult thing to know. You know, who's, super difficult. So this was helpful. I appreciate it very
I think
much.
one of the things that, from my opinion, that makes it challenging and why I suspect a lot of people don't make those recommendations is that at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about children that have disabilities, and one doesn't equal one, and that we always have to be mindful of the needs of that child and how the needs of one child does not equal the needs of another child. And so making those blanket recommendations is really, really challenging. You're not taking into consideration who this human being is as a learner. And we always want to keep that at first and foremost as that they're a little human being.
It just makes me also think, how do you evaluate performance at the end of the year? You know what I mean? Because you have to hold everybody at the same standard, right? So that.
Yeah, I will answer that, but I would just say to Julie's point that this is even, more complicated because we do have the DeCristofaro Learning Center coming online, and I do want to just point out, because it's not in there, guidelines for that will be different. So because those students will be our most complex and have the most significant needs, and so there's no way that they can have a caseload of 55. So I do just want to put that out there, that wasn't one of the groups, as I was sitting there looking at it thinking, oh, we don't have the learning center on there. So
Not yet.
yeah, not yet, but we will. And so for them, I think we were talking around the 25-ish, right, range, somewhere around there, because those students will require significant support from related service providers. So I just wanted to point that out. But, to your point, Mr. Guttrow, I can let these guys jump in, but I think that we are very fortunate that we have Jen. Jen does a lot of the evaluations and helps with a lot of the evaluations, and she lived and breathed it. And she's done every aspect really of the job. So I think we're very fortunate in special education that we have a very well-rounded team. We have Jen, who was a related service provider. We have Lisa, who was a psychologist. Jill, who was a guidance counselor. Katie and Simone were special education teachers. So and Julie has the preschool background. So we do have a very well-rounded team, and I think that really helps. So we have somebody on our team who has done the role or done the job, in some way, shape, or form. And so I do think that definitely helps. And I think that Jen, all of us, you do know, if you're looking at having done related service provider evals, you do know, like if I'm observing a small group at, say, Beechwood Knoll School, I am definitely not looking at the same thing as if I'm looking at, I'm over at, Snug Harbor or Squantum, and I'm watching them work on feeding or, whatever the case may be. There's definitely very different needs, but we all have our own, backgrounds and expertise in different areas. And I think that we rely on the people who we've hired, who are actually like really experts, as you can hear from Jen, in the area, to be able to, perform those evaluations.
Mr. Guttrow, are you all set?
Thank you.
I'm just going to go to Mr. Bergoli first because he hadn't had spoken yet. Ms. Bergoli.
And Maura was a guidance counselor. with our kids, do we have, we don't have a speech and language therapist for every school. So they travel, am I correct? Still?
Some of them do. So it depends on the school and the
Okay.
program and the number of students. So
I understand programming, but.
yeah, so like Snug Harbor has 3 full-time speech language pathologists just for the elementary part of the building and 2 full-time OTs just for the elementary and 1 speech assistant for the elementary. And then they have 2 full-time speech pathologists and 1 full-time assistant for the pre-K. So, depending on the building and how many students are there. And then there are other buildings, say, for example, speech-wise, Wollaston and Parker both have smaller numbers there. And obviously the needs of those students look very different from those in the CARES program at Snug Harbor. So that's one job is for that 1 speech therapist to travel between Wollaston and Parker. So,
Okay.
yeah. So it really does depend on the building and the number and intensity of the students in each building.
I'll come back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just want me to keep doing these buttons, Mr. Capoli. All right. Mrs. Lebo.
My other question was about the staffing. So I don't see COTAs. I'm looking at the caseload numbers, this slide. I don't see COTAs on there at all. So, I mean, how many of these people do we actually have? That's my first question. My second question is, how many of them actually work for us or come from a provider? And if they come from a provider, do we still evaluate them?
So we actually currently do not have any occupational therapy assistants. All of our students are serviced by the actual occupational therapists. Again, because their caseloads up until now have been manageable without needing an assistant. As far as we have 7 full-time SLPAs, and I believe 5 out of the 7 are QPS employees, and 2 of them are contracted through an agency.
And PTAs?
And PTAs, we have 2 of those as well, one of whom is a Quincy Public Schools employee, and one of who is contracted through South Shore Educational Collaborative.
And how many of the physical therapists are not QPS employees?
2 of them.
Two
So
of
we have
them?
1 full-time QPS employee, 1 full-time through a staffing agency, and 1
Point 4.
2 days a week through South Shore Educational Collaborative.
And what's the reason for that? Why don't we hire our own people?
We've been slowly trying to, the caseloads have varied so much in the last couple of years that we really, we tend to hire folks maybe mid-year through agencies. And then potentially we work with Mr. Mulaney and you all when the budget season comes about to try and change some of those over to Quincy Public Schools employees. And then we were just talking the other day, we have 2 of our speech and language pathologists that are contracted, and they are so absolutely incredible at the job that they do. We don't want to lose them. So, we're
Couldn't hire them?
It's a lot of paperwork, and, when you hire through agencies, it can get a little bit tricky, but.
I can see now why you would use them where the workload and the caseload is so
Yes.
variable, so.
Yeah.
But I still prefer us to have our own folks. And again, who evaluates those folks?
They don't go through the same ed-eval process that we do, per the Quincy contract, but we still go in and do observations and really keep track of the support that they're providing our students.
And do those agencies come with caseload requirements?
They do not.
And usually the agencies themselves will send me a survey. Sometimes I get the mid-year, end of the year, looking at their skills. So they're asking me to report back. So it looks different than our educator evaluation does, but usually the agencies are pretty good. And then some of them will just send me an email and say, how are things going? Fill me in on how our people are doing. So,
Thank you.
Mrs. Cahill.
So one other question. For an example, at Snug Harbor, if you have 3 providers there, do you kind of assess what the caseloads are like and the difficulty of them and try to, allocate the caseload equitably between 3 people? So we're not one provider is getting all the difficult cases that take more time?
Yes.
Is that up to
So,
you?
yeah, in particular at Snug Harbor, because I spend so much time over there. Yes, they're divided up. So we have the 9 CARES classes, 2 LDC classes, and then the general education population. So those 3 speech therapists have divided that caseload up. So one of them has like half the CARES, or like a third of the CARES. One is, we divided it up so they all have some substantially separate students and some gen ed students.
Yeah. So they have a
did
good,
kinda,
try and get a good
like,
balance.
try to get
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
balance. And we look at it every year. And, people who have been here longer will kind of look at it themselves and figure out how to work it. And then when you have new people, I usually go out and help them and say, this has been my experience. I think we should look at it this way. So we tried to keep it for the gen ed students. Usually someone will have like kindergarten and grade 1, grades 2 and 3, then grades 4 and 5. So that kind of the, what you'll be working on with the students would be similar. So rather than giving someone like kindergarten and grade 5 and they have to do all this very different planning based on the standards. So we try to kind of, that's another way to try to help them manage.
And it goes, and it,
Yeah, yeah.
continuum.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Burley.
Thank you. So, we have kids who are on IEPs for speech and language, but they don't necessarily have to be on IEPs, am I correct?
Correct.
They have 504s and/or student service plans? Is that the general direction,
Yes.
particularly at the elementary level, or is that more for the high school?
No, it's across all age spans. We really look at how much their speech and language needs affects their ability to access curriculum. And that is kind of a team decision as to if it's significant enough that requires an IEP, or if it's more just an articulation or working on one skills, that would be more of just a service plan.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Nope. All right, so I have a few questions as well. And a lot of my colleagues mentioned them, but it makes me a little uncomfortable too, having like some QPS staff and some outside contractors, just because I worry, if there's any friction there between staff having the same caseload as some, you know what I mean? So do you ever hear about anything like that, or?
I haven't heard directly from anyone about that. I try really hard to treat our agency employees and our Quincy employees the same. Everyone's invited to all our staff meetings. On my email groups, I have everyone on them. Like, I don't divide them out by how we're paying them. They're all here to do the same job, really, in my view. And it's just like the backside financial piece that looks a little different. So I haven't heard anybody complain about that or bring anything up to me. But yeah, from my standpoint, they're here, they got their license, they're a professional, they're working with our students, everyone
Right.
has access to all the same.
And then I really do like the idea of checking in with all of our providers to find out how they feel about it, because I think it's really a good point that some people, just thrive on a really strong caseload, being really busy, and some actually just need a little bit more time to process that back end of the communication piece or all that processing, and then, that kind of adds to their anxiety. So I think setting a number might be difficult, because I think just like our kids are, all of our providers might be feeling a little bit differently about it, but I think checking in with them and giving them the opportunity, even if it's, at the end of the year, even if it's anonymous or something, to just kind of have some open response to you about, what their caseload was like or their workload was like for the year. And just that would give you good feedback to plan for the next year. So I think that would be great. And then I heard a couple ideas about, you were talking about trying to have different things where you combine different therapies together. And I think that's a great idea. Now, I worry a little, in an effort to look at the caseloads and try to have them be manageable, I also don't want to shortchange our kids. That's the most important for me. So, combining where it makes sense, but if we're combining and it's, taking away from that individual student's time that they really need to focus just on speech, or I think, as long as we're not condensing so that we're at the detriment to the kids, which I would think, of course, you guys would
Yeah.
be looking at in a situation like that. And I guess that would be a parent-approved thing that would happen too if
Yeah, we
they were
usually make
merged.
sure that, yeah. And generally, if there are co-treatments happening, it's not for all of the therapy time for the week. So if they have 2 or 3 speech therapy sessions and 2 OT sessions, speech and OT may do one together, but then the other one they're doing individually. So a lot of times it's a combination of different things for the students. So not necessarily, doing co-treatments all the time together.
Right, I think where it makes sense, then some students are probably going to be more, that's going to help them more than others. I think that's.
And I
great.
really see the students with the more significant disabilities who are really struggling with those functional skills, where there are so many different components there between their communication and their fine motor skills. Or a PT and OT often work together because they're both motor skill based disciplines. And I find like the OT's expertise in the sensory areas is so helpful. And for me, doing speech therapy with students, if they're having a hard time sitting and participating, having an OT who could be like, try this, try that. Like, we've got to figure out how to regulate their sensory system to get them ready to sit and participate in an activity. Having that person kind of right there to help was a huge help for me. And I learned a lot from my colleagues from other disciplines to help. A student doesn't come to speech like just ready to focus on speech. There's their whole world, is impacting how they may be day to day or minute to minute. So knowing those strategies and having those other professionals there to help, I found to be really helpful with those more complex students.
For sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense because I'm assuming that a lot of the, the numbers between, you listed the number of kids receiving OT and the number of kids receiving speech. And I assume there's some crossover between,
Yes.
they're not
Yeah.
totally separate kids. So that makes sense for some students, I'm sure. You guys do a lot of work. This is great. The services, the related services we provide here are fantastic, especially I remember watching the COVID, all you guys did during COVID to deliver these services. I mean, it's just, you guys just above and beyond all the time. So thank you for all your work on this. Anyone else? No, you're fine.
So in terms of this being not moving it forward to policy, so I think that's how we're going to leave it, right? And we just have it maybe incorporated in the future into your reporting, and then this way, so if you do find, next year that the loads are getting big with the new school and all that, and you need support in terms of more staff or whatever, that's where maybe we can take a look and help moving forward. Okay?
Yeah, having it be part of your.
Thank you so much.
Part of your program improvement plan would be a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can incorporate that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Sorry.
For clarification,
Yep.
we're going
Mrs.
to take this out of policy then, because it's been in
Yes.
policy? Okay.
Yes.
Are you okay with that, Chair Gattro? Okay. All right, so agenda item number 4, we're going to have a CPAC update, and I see Ms. Wood and Ms. Wilson here. Thank you guys for hanging out to the end of the meeting here to present to us.
Do you want to be in charge of this? Yeah. Hi, guys.
Hi, welcome.
So our first thing we'd love to say is that we would like to have these seats next time because we would love to ask questions.
We have to
I
go
think
back
there's a
to high school.
line. I think there's a line of people that would love to have that.
Okay, so we've been here multiple times. I'm Sarah Wood, the Quincy CPAC president, and this is Darlene Wilson, our treasurer. We are representing tonight. The rest of our group is watching us right now. So we are the CPAC, which is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, as you guys know, and we work really closely with families, with the administration, to try and bridge the gap between parents and administration, teachers, schools, all of it. And I think we've made a lot of progress in the past couple of years in getting more parents aware of things that are going on, or are finding out from parents when things aren't working and trying to present them to the administration to get support for those for families that need it. And like I said, we just kind of were talking, and I think an idea of a parent academy for the IEP would be great. So definitely want to put that out there. So we are going to give you a brief update tonight on this year's goals and where we're at. And we're also going to give you some accomplishments so far that we've had this year and our mid-year focus. So our goals for 23-24 have been partner with district to ensure parent representation as QPS prepares to open the Learning Center. That's ongoing. We are currently part of the design team for the Learning Center, and that's been great. We've really gotten to collaborate and provide feedback on what we think would be important for the Learning Center. For me personally, my son He's 18 now, but he's been in a substantially separate classroom since he started school. He's autistic, nonverbal, so I have everything that you're planning to bring into this school. I have lived it, and we love. He's out of district. He's been out of district since he was 8, and we love where we are. So I'm really trying to help provide information to make sure that the kids coming up get the same kind of services and help he's gotten in the past 10 years. But so we really are happy with our work with the design team. So we want to create a standard to improve communication between caregivers and staff, starting with the CARES program. We started, actually Darlene can speak to this because she started it in September with Julie.
Yeah, so and I think we spoke to you guys about this when we came last time, but over this summer, Julie, Jen, and myself worked together to create a communication log for focusing on the preschool kids, but also the kids that are a bit older, elementary age in the CARES program. So we had heard from some of the parents that they weren't aware of what was going on during the day for their nonverbal kiddos. But Julie picked that up and we worked together and we were able to finalize a document for the beginning of the school year.
So yeah, so hopefully we haven't done a real survey of how it's going, but so far it's been implemented. So for us, that's a win. The other thing, we collaborate with QPS and families to better understand the ongoing transportation challenges, identify gaps, and capitalize on what's working well. We did a survey over the summer, which we had talked about in the fall, and it seems we have not heard, knock on wood, we have heard nothing negative about transportation as of now. So I'm sure there's always an issue, but from our perspective, we're not getting a lot of feedback saying that there is a substantial problem. So that's a good thing. So we'll hope we do like to check in. So we will check in with families and make sure that they are successful in their transportation issues. I know it's ongoing because the drivers are impossible to keep and get. So it's just an ongoing situation. But we keep an eye on it, but we haven't heard anything as of yet. And then we will be collaborating with QPS to provide training to staff. We had talked about this, about ongoing trainings for staff, especially paras. We were concerned about paras having enough training when it came to kids with intensive special needs and possibly behavioral issues and how to handle that in a classroom. So we had talked about different ways that maybe there could be more trainings provided, and that's really it's happening more and more because I know the paras have agreed to participate in more of these types of trainings. So, and they're getting incentivized to do it. So it's a great thing, and we're excited to hear that. So we're hoping to continue that in the next couple of years. Our goals are to continue community engagement. That's an ongoing thing. This year, we did hear from a lot of preschool parents. I will say we heard from some in December who are not happy with us because we do not offer the gingerbread house decorating to preschoolers, only because it was always been an elementary school program. So we tried to keep it with that elementary school group, and we also include the older kids as well. But so this year, we are really trying to focus on providing more programs for our preschool kiddos, and we just had one in February. It was a really great sensory event where we did a Valentine's theme, and we had about 50 preschoolers in the Quincy High School cafeteria who had a great time playing with slime and doing all kinds of fun activities, and it was a great opening. And the parents are really excited because, as I said, preschool parents are new. They're coming into all this hot in a lot of ways. They're coming in looking for support. They're looking for friends. They're looking for people for their kids to socialize with. So we're going to try and do more to get them some of that time to meet different people and get some one-on-one time with new friends. And so it was a great event. So we're really excited. We're also focusing a lot, and again, I will say this is personal to me, on the 14 to 22-year-old group. As far as QPS is concerned, I think the 14 to 22-year-old group has they're not getting as much time as I say the younger kids get because they're older. So it just seems like we're losing a lot from the social, emotional part of it, the transition part of it. I don't think kids and parents are as knowledgeable as what happens during that transition period, especially 18 to 22. I've talked to parents who don't know anything about guardianship or any of the things that kind of come at that age range. And I think it would be nice to work with QPS, but also to get parents involved and trying to understand what they need at that age group, because it's a big transition and it's a really important time. So it requires a lot of support. And just on that point, I will say I am out of district with my son, and his school is fabulous about giving us information. They walked me through the whole guardianship process. Obviously, my son requires full guardianship, so I had to go to court and do all of that, but they walked me through every step. So when I went, I just went through the motions and got it done. And it's such an needed, important thing, because you think you know so much. I mean, I have a background in special education, no idea about the processes that come with the 18 to 22-year-old. All right, so we partnered with the district to ensure parent representation as QPS prepares to open the Learning Center. We are active members of the design team, the CPAC board. We toured the schools and gave input on what they were going to be bringing into the school. We have monthly meetings with QPS leadership and the CPAC board. And we consulted about curriculum and programming, the new programs, the WELL program and the Unique Learning program that's going to be implemented in the new school. So we also, for our community engagement, we had a really successful gingerbread house event. We've had Sing, Explore, Create that have been really great collaborators with us. They are now going to after-school programs in Quincy and doing great programs for Squantum and Snug right now. And they also are doing our vacation week camps. So they just did one in February that was full. I think Julie said fairly quickly it was full. And we're also going to be doing an April vacation camp, which is great. The parents really love it and the kids love it. It's a great way. I mean, for a lot of these kids, they don't get that kind of camp experience or the type of like activities during February and April vacation. It's a tough time for parents and kids because going off your routine is just impossible and it becomes a difficult week. So these type of things are great for these kiddos. We did a preschool popsicle event. It was not the greatest success, but we hope that next year it will be, because now we know, well, and next year all the kids will be in one school, so it'll be easy to access them, as opposed to this year where we had to go to multiple schools and try and get information out, and it was a little tougher. But we're really positive about next year. We did our new preschool focused event for Valentine's Day, which, as I said, was really successful. And we are working on a spring event for the spring. It's not done yet. We're not sure on what we're doing, but we'll send you pictures when it does happen. And each month we do provide presentations to the community. So we have our regular monthly CPAC meeting, which also includes a parent support group. And then the last week of the month, the last Thursday of the month, we do presentations to the community. So right now, tomorrow, we're partnering with QPS about the SOA program. So we'll be presenting, that will be considered our presentation for the month. But we also have a presentation coming up next month about transitions. And that's going to be with,
Dr. Jody Wanger at Boston Medical Center. She's a complex care pediatrician.
Yeah, so she's going to be coming and doing a presentation about the transition process. So we have something every month, and it's been we've had a lot of parents interested in participating, and so we're excited about what the future's going to be. And there's some photos from our preschool event. And I have to say, because I think all my children are watching right now, these photos are thanks to my lovely daughter, Avery. She's 16 and a photo student at North Quincy. And this is our gingerbread event. We had a great amount of kids come out. It was a really great event. So as I said, our mid-year focus is going to be on the 14 to 22-year-olds. I'm actually working on a survey right now to try to get out to parents, because the one thing we have a hard time with this age is engaging families, because after a certain age, like after elementary, maybe beginning and middle, you lose parents, because I think their kids are on the bus, they don't get as much engagement in the school, and their kids sometimes, quite honestly, it's more difficult. As kids get older, it's harder to get them engaged in activities. It's also, things change. I mean, you're going through a lot of changes as a teenager in general, but as a teenager with special needs, it's intensified. So it's often hard to get those kids involved in activities. For me, I couldn't find anything, quite honestly. And for my son, once he turned about 12 to 13, taking him to the rec basketball buddy program, which I think is great, didn't work because a lot of times these programs focus on 5 to 22. There's no break. So it's not like you're having 5 to 10-year-olds in a room. You're having 5 to 22-year-olds all in one room. And that's just not, one, it's not respectful. It's demeaning to the older kids. But also it's a tough thing. You just can't have 5-year-olds and 22-year-olds participating in the same space. So it does cause a lot of kids to just drop off and become antisocial, and a lot of times don't want to leave the house. So I think this is a really important thing that we need to be looking at, I think, 14 to 22, because once they turn 22, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if, but the Boston Globe and a lot of different papers have been talking about the fact that this is the first year, this year and the next couple of years, the biggest amount of students at 22 will have nowhere to go. Because between COVID and losing programs and all these other, it's the state's just not ready for the influx of students that are coming. And that's terrifying as a parent to know that when your child turns 22, they're in your house and you have to figure out what to do. And they can't be left alone and they can't just be sent out the door. They don't have that capability. So it's something that like I said, I'm very focused on, but I think it's really important as a system to be looking at what the thought process is to help parents figure out what the next step is.
And what they need, right?
Yeah.
The concerns of the parents of this age group.
Yeah, so that's a big thing that will be happening for us this year. Is that it?
That's it, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
We are done.
There's no questions. Are there
yeah.
any questions?
Thank you. I have a bunch of comments, but I'm going to open it up for my colleagues first.
I always have a question.
Mrs. Levo, I just keep looking to my left here, so there you go. You're
I'm
lucky.
so grateful for you guys. I really am, and for your whole team. It's amazing work that you've been doing. And you're absolutely right about the younger kids. And you made that decision yourself with the gingerbread night. You broke
Yeah,
off.
we
three-
split it up.
Yeah, and I think it is not respectful. It's just not respectful to do that, and you will lose the kids. And I want to apologize because we had said we would go to the recreation department with you people, and we haven't done it yet.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Hubley and I were going to go to the recreation department with you and talk to them about coming up with some specific program for the older kids, and getting that message to them too about the respectful thing.
Yeah.
So, and Dave Murphy did make a commitment to us that he would work on that and help us with that. So I'm going to tell you now that within the next couple of weeks, we will have a meeting that some of you will come to so we can start that conversation. Because it's really, I'm embarrassed to say that we didn't do it, we haven't done anything about it. But that could be part of the engagement.
Yeah.
But they have to have programs that are going to be
Yeah.
engaging.
Yes.
I'm just really, I think you're terrific.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Mrs. Cahill.
Yes, we agree. You're terrific and you're doing great work. Every time you come, you've expanded what you're doing. But when you were talking about the transition from 14 to 22 and having the parent academies and the meetings, that you're going to have someone come that can present on some of the things like the guardianships and things like that that you need to do. Is that right? Because I was going to say that might be a good. I'm just confirming that's what you meant when you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be.
Because that might be a good vehicle for you to get that messaging out there.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we are going to look for support on, is that just trying to engage these parents. How do we reach them? Because we can't just, I mean, we don't have emails for every student, and a lot of 14 to 22-year-olds in our system are out of district. A lot, I mean, because that kind of happens as they get older, they move out of district to more substantial needed programs. And we don't have access to that information to get parents information. So that's kind of what we're looking to get more support to do that. And try and communicate somehow to these parents.
Anyone else?
How do we do that?
I also just want to echo Mrs. Lebo and just thank you for everything you're doing, in addition to doing a lot of this important work, and you're informing the group of what needs to happen and being that real link between the parents and the school department. And I love seeing you work so well, you know, Julie and your team working so well with CPAC and really bringing that in, because I think that that's truly how we make things better, and you guys are living it. So not only are you planning all these things, you actually have special needs kiddos at home, and it's a lot that
Yeah.
you're doing, in addition to just living and trying to do the best for your kids. And so thank you. This is so important, and I think it makes a big difference, especially all these outside of school programs you're running. It makes a world of difference to the kids and the families, and just being a connection point. I know you guys have parent support time where people can come to your meeting, and you can just talk, you can vent a little bit, and you can just have that space, and that's so valuable. I think I would think to have that. So thank you for all the work that you're reporting you're doing, and all the stuff I know that you're not even saying yet goes into all that. So thank you. All right. I think we have reached the end of the agenda. So motion to approve. Do we have to do a motion to approve?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. That's what I mean. Yeah, sorry. Motion to adjourn. All right. We're adjourned. Thank you.